but I came up with a list of 44 businesses that were in town and operating when I was a kid. That didn't count the suburbs of Wiltseyville or Hubbardtown. Hubbardtown had the Brush and Pallet, and I worked there when I was much younger as a waiter for a brief time period. And that was quite a trip. And I have several Max Murray paintings. Max Murray was the artist that owned the Brush and Palette back in the 40s and 50s. And I have several of his paintings, and I have a service of 12 of the ironstone dishes that were used at the Brush and Palette. They're like red willowware and very heavy for a runt that I was at 16 years old to carry the trays of those dishes. I almost always needed help. And there was a gas station in Hubbardtown, Joe Charles Golf Station. Some of you, I'm sure, can remember that. And the Yost brothers had a garage there, Chuck and John Yost. And it's now where Warner's is. And the thing I remember most about Yost Brothers Garage is they sold Cheerio ice creams, which was vanilla ice cream coated in chocolate, and it was 10 cents. Popsicles were a nickel. So being a poor family, we almost always had popsicles. As we come into Candor, I sort of went through where I went with the paper route, leaving some of the people out, but some of the buildings, but some of it may be a little bit repetitive from when I talked about the paper route, but I've got to tell you some of the stories because they were fun, you know, and so I will tell you those. If you want to interject anything or tell more that you know, there are things that I will tell you that could be wrong. Remember, I'm trying to remember 50, 60 years ago. And so I want you to just reflect back on what Candor was in the 1950s and early 60s. And I always say that the Beatles ruined our country coming here. They were good, but yet things changed. And the year before they came, our president was assassinated. And I think that changed the country tremendously. And we've gone through a lot of changes in those years. And we had businesses we could rely on. We had businesses where we didn't have to go to some franchise store to get things. We had businesses that made us a community. And the business owners certainly were our parents away from home. They made sure we toed the mark, and some of them more so than others. And I really appreciate my growing up in Candor, and I can't wait to become an adult. And but I always met the guy that brought the papers, the Ithaca Journal, which I was a paper boy for 5 years. I always met him at Charlie Kachergis's Fix-It shop. Charlie was a crippled man in a wheelchair that could fix anything, or at least he said he could. And I remember that he had a bird in there that could talk, and Charlie was just a wonderful guy. He would have soda in there and always give me a soda when I was waiting for papers, and always go about his business fixing whatever he had to fix. The Fix-It shop was on the corner where the new parking lot is for the school, and right on that corner as you come out of the parking lot for the school. And the Quick family lived upstairs over the Fix-It shop. That was Eddie and Charlie Quick and Ruth, and they lived upstairs over the Fix-It shop. And Catherine Crane lived out back. Catherine was a sister to Ted Nicholson. Some of you know Ted Nicholson, or remember Ted. She lived in the house where the veterinarian is now. And her husband Fred was an engineer, and he had a business where the American Legion is. And that went defunct, and the Legion ended up taking that over. But they lived in that house. And I have a mirror that was in Ted's house. And when I was a kid, I would go visit Carol, her daughter, who was my age, and I'd go up there and visit. And I can remember this mirror being in the dining room of that house. And it had a crest at the top of the mirror. And I knew it was good wood, it was mahogany. And I always remember that because it looked like it should be in the Queen's castle. You know, it looked like a crown there. And so several years ago, you know, Ralph Glenn bought that house, and I was going to buy that house, but it didn't work out. And so Ralph had a yard sale before the carriage house, which was a beautiful building. Some of you will remember that. And that burned because they were raising chickens, and the light over the chickens set the place on fire and burned it. And so Ralph had a yard sale, and I saw that crest and the top of the mirror, the two side pieces and the bottom piece, and it was all in 4 different pieces. So I said to Ralph, I wonder what that is. Well, I think it's parts to a bed, Ralph says. I knew what it was, but I said, I said, how much do you want for it? You know, I'm going to have $10 for it because it's mahogany. And I says, well, all right, I'll give you $10 for it. And I took it home, put it together, put a mirror in it, and I've got a beautiful mirror in the dining room of my house, the Edge of Time bed and breakfast. So if you're ever in the area, stop in and look in the mirror and see what you don't like to see. Okay. So next to Charlie's Fix-It shop was the Century Cleaners. And some of you remember the Century Cleaners. John Stickle owned the Century Cleaners. And I think several of the employees are still alive. John is not, but...
I'd like to say something when you're through with that.
Okay, all right. Unless it's dirty, you can't say anything dirty. Okay, all right. But Mrs. Moyer worked there.
Yeah.
Huh? And I think that Marion Richards worked there at one point for a brief time. And Arlene Gillette worked there a brief time, too.
And Marie Lipka worked there.
And Marie Lipka had worked there. Some of the names that you draw from the past, as far as that goes. And the thing I loved about Century Cleaners, as you walked by, they would release the steam from the cleaner, and it would come out across the sidewalk, and I always thought they did it just as I walked by to scare me, and they probably did. But it would make a big hissing noise, and then that would come on and be released, and so it would constantly be there. And dry cleaners in Candor, New York, and that's back when you needed to have clothes dry cleaned. Not so much anymore. Go ahead.
I worked at the dry cleaners for years, and I remember Harvey Manley used to stand outside and watch me press the clothes. But what I want to talk
That's a good story. Very good story. The next place up was a group of buildings which had the IGA that Sandy's parents owned, Glenn and Dorothy Boyd, and after that, who bought John LaGeorge bought it after them.
Bill Black.
Bill Black and Bill and Barbara Black, and then John and Betty LaGeorge, and it's been several different businesses, and it's now the Five. It's a pizza place, and to the side of that building, back then funeral directors couldn't count on a death a day, so they always had an extra business. And the business was usually either a paint and wallpaper store or a furniture store. And Myron Miller, who owned the funeral home, he had a furniture store in there. Can you imagine Candor had a furniture store? Unbelievable. But it was a nice little furniture store, and that's where the part of the building is now that is a video store, and I think a beauty salon now. Lux Beauty Salon is in there. And I got thinking about one of the first strip malls probably in this part of the world. Because there was 3 businesses all going along at once. Then the next building up was the Candor Courier, where the Main Street liquor store is now. Candor Courier, which was run by Art Beebe. And Art Beebe, I think Arlene Gillette worked for Art Beebe some too, and Art was quite a character, and I think of Art every election day because my father would go up to vote, and he was a Republican, and my mother was a Democrat. So Art Beebe would go up, or my father would go up and vote, and while he was out voting, Art Beebe would come down and get my mother to go up and cancel my father's vote by voting her ticket. So he ran the roads with people trying to convince how the election should turn out. Then the next place, which is a little apartment building now, was the funeral home. And at one time, before my time, I think somebody might remember, the funeral home was in one side, and I believe the library was in the other side of the funeral home. My uncle, who was killed in World War II, he was killed in '44, but they didn't bring his body back from France until 5 years later. But I have pictures of them carrying the casket out of the funeral home side of that building. And it had to have been a tiny, tiny funeral home. So I do have those pictures. And then a couple doors from that was Dr. Moulton's office. There was Dr. Moulton, whose bodyguard was Nellie Moulton, his wife. And some of you knew, I only remember what she looked like, but she certainly walked ahead of Doc Moulton and made sure the path was cleared. And and I think they lived in the Great House two doors down from the funeral home, I think.
Right next to it.
Was it?
Right next to my Miller's house.
Okay, yeah, Pop Miller's house was the next one, and then theirs. And was that where George and Hugh Caples?
No,
They lived the next one. They lived the next one. And then the next one would have been Bert and Mamie LaGrange's house. And so that's that side of Main Street in the business district, which we already have a lot of businesses there. And in the past, in the 50s. Across the street was the Fountain Inn.
Oh, yeah.
The Fountain Inn was the restaurant in Candor. There was a couple restaurants, but the Fountain Inn was there. And I believe that the St. John family, I think, originated the fountain, and then Harry Stead later on, he and his family ran the fountain inn for quite some time. And later on, it became the law offices for Ron Fitzgerald. And he redid the fountain inn into his law offices. The next place up where Jeannie Meta had her hair salon was started out as Marion Weber's beauty salon, and her husband Bob built that building. And after Marion was done with it, Alice Storms, she took it over, and us kids always chuckled that Alice had probably 2 hairs on her head, and yet she was a beautician. People go in to get a dye job, come out with pink hair, you know, and so us kids got a chuckle that Alice didn't have any hair, but yet she was a beautician. And that is where the current bakery is now on Main Street. And then we come to Kilpatrick's Variety Store, where Elmer and Clara Kilpatrick had a business. And everybody went to Kilpatrick's, called Killy's. They had a beautiful ice cream fountain there that was granite. I don't know how it was so heavy, I don't know how it ever stayed up on that floor. And often if Clara wasn't there to wait on us, we'd go in and Elmer would be sitting in the back booth playing solitaire. And he would get very upset if we went in the store, because most of the boys would head over to the corner where the girly magazines were, and he would have to keep an eye on us while playing solitaire. I shouldn't have said us, on the boys that were in the girly magazines. And he would get quite upset and quite brusque if we stayed too long. And the fun part of going to Killy's was a whole huge penny candy case. And you could get penny candy, if you had 10 cents, you could get a whole little bag of penny candy. And some of you, I'm sure, remember going in there. And it was a lot of fun. Then the next place up was the drugstore. Can you imagine? Candor had a drugstore. Carmen and Seward Ellis. I got a call when I was in college. Carmen had red hair, and she always wore bright red lipstick, not always on her lips. So I was in college, and my friend Corrine Craig, who was my sidekick, she called me and said, Carmen Ellis died today. I said, oh my gosh, no, why? What happened? She said, they think it's an overdose of lipstick. and I would spend at least an hour, when I collected for papers, I would spend an hour talking to Carmen Ellis, because she knew I knew all the scoop of all my customers. So she'd pump me for information. And it got so, Mamie LaGrange knew when I was going to go in and collect her papers, so she'd come down so she could get the information. And one morning I was in there one Saturday morning, and Seward Ellis says, "Did you hear what happened last night?" And I said, "No, I just started paperwork, so I didn't hear anything." He said, "Well, Myron Miller went out on a call, and he came back and he opened the back of the hearse, and he said he opened the door and pulled the casket out on the church truck. It's the thing that it's wheeled on. It's called a church truck. Got away from him and came right across the street through my front door and smashed the door and came right halfway into the and he's yelling stop that coughing, stop that coughing. And I said, oh my God, what did you do? I said, I handed him a bottle of cough syrup. So this is one thing that I will always remember about Seward Ellis. And they had a cabin up on Reservoir Hill Road that they went to back in the day when businesses were closed at noon on Wednesday, because they were open on Friday nights, and so they closed on Wednesdays at noon. And they would go up to, they always drove a huge white Cadillac, and they'd go to their cabin far away up on Reservoir Hill. And when they went out, Carmen always wore a fur coat, mink coat, dressed to the nines with lipstick all over her face. Excuse me. The next place up was LaGrange's hardware store. Bert LaGrange looked like a miniature Alfred Hitchcock. He looked just like Alfred Hitchcock. And you could go in there, and no matter what you asked for, he'd rummage around down cellar and come up with it. If it was something that you needed in the 1880s, he still had it. And I remember walking in there, and it was a gray building, and you get inside, and there were steps that would go up there, and he'd be behind the counter there. You could just see the top of his head. He was a rather short fella, and looked just like Alfred Hitchcock. And that building burned. One night I was on patrol, when I was a deputy, I was on patrol with Les Swartz, and I said to him, I said, I feel like the hardware store is going to burn sometime. And he says, why do you say that? I said, I don't know, it's just a feeling I have. The next night it burned. And it was sad. It was an arson. And the guy was put in prison for that. And I remember that they were taking it apart to get rid of it, and they found a little kitten underneath that had survived the fire. And I don't know whatever happened to the kitten, I forgot. They named it something associated with the hardware store.
Could I tell you a little story about Mr. LaGrange?
Yes.
My mother-in-law at that time was Jean Houck, and she and I were doing a project on this old bed. We could cut the legs off really modernized, but we needed some screws. So we went up to the hardware store, and Jean told him what we needed. So he went off somewhere, and he came back, and he had screws about that long, and we need short screws. And Grandma says to him, well, my God, she said, we'd be screwing all night. Mr. LaGrange turned right around, walked right out, went out the back door. And Grandma had no idea what she had said. But I
One year at Christmas, I was talking with the Ellises at the drugstore, and Mamie LaGrange, like I said, always came down. And she came down, her husband collected coins. And she came down and put a silver dollar in my hand. And for me, that was huge. You know, that was really huge. I still have the silver dollar, and I says, oh my gosh, this is too much. Why did you do this? Oh, she says, I just went in my husband's collection and grabbed one. He's got a lot of other ones. So I don't know if Bert ever missed that coin or not. I think it was like a 1886 silver dollar or something, but oh well, I still got it. They had no children, as I recall, and he was very, very much a benefactor to the fire department. I think when they died, he left like $100,000 fire department. And when it was the alert hose or alpha hose, I never knew which was which. The alert hose, I think, was up at the brick building by the red and white store, which we'll get to there. And alpha hose was below town, that covered below town. That was the gray building that's now an apartment building right next to the laundromat. And you could tell by the number of rings on the whistle whether it was alpha hose or alert hose or this end of town or that end of town. Candor was so huge, we had to have the two fire companies. And in later years they combined them, and fortunately we have this beautiful building as far as that goes. Next to LaGrange's, setting back from the road, was the telephone company. And the telephone company had operators and Ruth Morris was one of the operators. She worked there for years. And after the telephone company left, there was a dentist that went in there when I was a kid. His name was Dr. Ziolski, and he was brutal. And I can't go any further with that. He was just brutal, and I have PTSD from that. But anyway, he wasn't here that long at all, but maybe a year, maybe 2 years, but he was there. Then the next place up, the gray building on the corner, was the Market Basket. Some of you remember the Market Basket. It was run by Tom and Kate Craig's, Tom Sr. and Kate Craig. They ran a little grocery store there, little corner grocery store, neighborhood store. Like there was at one time 4 grocery stores in Candor, and all at the same time. And that was the Market Basket on one side of that gray building. On the other side of that gray building was Winston Ives. He was the lawyer, and he was in partnership with Ron Telfer, and they had their business in part of it. Judy Johnson was their secretary. Judy would walk down from her house up by the Ball Diamond every day. You'd see her walking down, and always carried an umbrella, even on the most beautiful days, because she was afraid it might rain in the afternoon. And she's, I think, still alive and a patient at Oak Hill, I think, nursing home. But when I was on the ambulance squad, we had to take Winston to the hospital, and he had, I think, pneumonia or something. And he was very tall. Winston was like probably 6'4", 6'6". He was very tall. And I was on the run with Mike Ferris, and some of you we all remember Mike Ferris. And so we get him in the back of the rig, and Mike says to him, "Winston, we're going to have to cut your legs off at the knees here. We can't get the door shut." And Winston goes, "Well, do what you got to do." So we got him to the hospital, and everything turned out fine. So then if you go out behind the Market Basket, there was the GLF building. GLF became Agway later on. The GLF building, and Dick Zavato bought that and has turned it into an absolutely gorgeous apartment building, and thus one of Candor's buildings has been saved. And I think that what they're doing now with the buildings in Candor is unbelievable. Chad Rose is doing a great job, and looks beautiful downtown. If we can just get businesses back, I'd be waiting for Sword and Carmen to come back, but they ain't back yet. So the GLF building, many of you remember, there's a little driveway that goes by out toward Menscoy's mill, the feed mill there, and that was quite a well-known parking place, in case you didn't know that. Is there anyone here that parked there?
Oh, you're not kidding.
I could, you won't admit to it, huh? I have some good stories about that, but I can't tell them here. Okay, that will be in the uncensored version next year. Okay, and so the Wardemanskoy Mill was out on the corner of Smith Street and Rich Street, and that was run by Keen Ward and Edgar Skoy, right? And they ran that for years. Don Weber, who just died recently, he was their financial person for probably 100 years, I don't know, but a long time. And they had a hardware store and the feed mill, and was very, very much a needed thing in a farm community. And so I've heard recently, yes, Darlene.
I could add to that, the big tall building where part of the building where their big feed bins are. My dad cut the lumber for that back in the, I think, early 50s, with horses. Cut the woods cut the trees out of the, I think they call it the crane's nest off the property. Sawed all the lumber, and that's what was the big bins that are Wardemanskoy in that building.
And Darlene's father is still living, and he'll be 103 on Christmas Day. 102, that's right. So, 102 on Christmas Day.
Wow.
So, still going strong. Is he still cutting lumber? Gave up on that. On the corner diagonal from the feed mill was Bob Butterfield's insurance agency. And he and Kathleen had an insurance agency in their house. And that was one of the businesses here in Candor. And there was an accident on the corner by Bob Butterfield's. It was Phyllis Brown, who always rode a bicycle and always wore hot pink ankle socks and an apron. And she got her apron caught in the front wheel of the bicycle and went right over the handlebars. Got up, dusted herself off, got back on the bicycle, and away she went. So that was the scene of one of the major accidents here in Canada. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Then where the funeral home is, that's where Judge Turk lived for 53 years. That house was built in 1825. The house across the street, where the veterinarian is, was built in 1826 by two brothers, the Smith brothers, not the cough drop people, but the Smith brothers. And they had come from Smithboro, which was named for them, and they had a hotel in Wiltseyville at one time, and they each built those houses a year apart, 1825 and 1826. On the side street, on Smith Street, where there's an apartment house there now right behind where the Loft restaurant was, that was Cardwell's meat locker and freezer plant. You could go in there and rent a locker in the freezer and put the meat and stuff you wanted frozen in there, and then if you needed it for supper, you'd go in the afternoon and get it out of the freezer and thaw it out. And Fox Cardwell was the man that owned that, and they Grace was my second grade school teacher. And when Fox died, Betty Okonski sent a sympathy card to Fox, giving her sympathy for Grace's death. And Grace got hold of her and said, "Fox died, I'm still very much alive." So they got a little confused is all. But they also had a son that was an adopted son, Billy Cardwell, And Billy was, a wayward child. When some of you remember Billy, I'm sure, and they lived where Jan and Les Swartz lived, was their house, and Billy was always getting in trouble. And one morning, Fox asked Billy to take the receipts from the locker plant to deposit them in the bank, and Billy wanted friends. So he took the money to school and passed it out to all the kids in the class, and they all became his friends. And I don't know what happened when he got home, but that happened, okay? Then the Loft Restaurant, that's been a gas station several times. There was a man from New Jersey, Tony Squarrow, who owned that gas station at one time. When he went out of business, they tried to turn it into an auction house. And I remember stopping there on my paper route, and I wish I had insight back then, or I wish I was older. They would sell these beautiful marble top Victorian dressers and stands, wash stands, and chairs and everything. And I remember they went for a quarter, 50 cents. Nowadays, you could, if you would have had a barn full of those, you could retire. But it was always fun to go there during the auction. And I remember seeing a friend of mine across the way, and I waved. And the guy said, 50 cents right there, that you can't have 50 cents for that dresser. I said, what the hell am I going to do with a dresser? And I couldn't get it home on my bicycle. But anyway, that was a business there. And then around the corner, there's a big house that has brick pillars on it now, an apartment house up on Spencer Avenue. That was Scoutton's nursing home. And my neighbor was a nurse there, Gracie, German, and she was a nurse there. And I had an uncle that died there at Scoutton's, and they had probably 7 or 8 rooms there, and Candor had its own nursing home. And we've lost a lot of things through the years as far as that goes, but...
Bill?
Yes.
So between the nursing home and the gas station, was the Whitmore's coal business?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, I forgot about that. The Marion Richards' parents owned a coal business there, and we had a coal stove in our living room, and he would always show up on Saturday mornings about 8 o'clock and run that coal down a chute, which seemed like hours to keep us awake. I was sure he did it just to keep us awake. But they had that, and one of the features of that house was one of his old trucks sat out front, and it had a tree growing up through the truck.
That was a landmark.
That was a landmark, and that really should have, I always regret that I didn't take a picture of that, because I'd like to have painted a picture of that, because that was something. Right across the street was where Seti Rowe lived, and it was before my time, but Earl Diller, which was Alice Thomas's father, ran a bakery out of that gray house where Donahue's had it as an apartment house right across the street. And then up the street from that was American Legion Post 907, and I can remember several trips to American Legion Post 907. My father had a thirst, and they had shuffleboard on a table with these round metal things, and you could play that. You had to put sawdust on it to scoot the things along, and you always got your fingers smacked between two of the plates on the. And then the Legion moved on and went up to where Fred Nicholson's engineering business was, and where it is today, as far as that goes. Then we come back down on the corner in the intersection across from the loft was Vanderbogart's store, which when I was a kid was Hollenbeck's Red and White store. And there was Jim Hollenbeck and his wife Beatrice, and Beatrice would always make sure us kids were in line and behaved ourselves when we were in there. And we were scared to death of her, and had reason to be. And I remember that there was a side part to that that's no longer there, and they sold, excuse me, they sold boots, they sold shoes, and I can remember they sold what at that time was called oilcloth for your table. And you could have several yards of oilcloth cut off, and I think it was 35 cents a yard or something like that, and you'd take that home, and it was on your kitchen table. And my mother would forget to use a cutting board, and so she'd take the paring knife that she got in Robin Hood flour and chop up stuff on that, and they'd always get a cut in the oilcloth, so eventually we had to go back to Hollenbeck's to get another oilcloth. Excuse me. So that was a nice store too. I mean, we had some nice stores. The IGA and Hollenbeck's, and all of them were very good stores. We need another one. We need something that's going to sell meat and produce here. Next to the Red and White store was the other fire company, either Alert or Alpha Hose, whichever it was. Alert, that was Alert Hose up there, and Alpha down the other end. And that became, Rex Barden had a gym in there for a while. And then later on, a restaurant opened up in there, and several different people ran that restaurant. The next building down was John Marks's barber shop. And I don't know if anyone remembers John Marks, but he was around 400 years old, and he still cut hair, you know. And when he retired, Florence Birch opened a gift shop there. Florence Birch was a person who, when she saw me coming, she knew I had money because I had a paper route, and she would always sell me whatever she wanted to sell me. It started out right after LaGrange's closed the hardware store. She had it in there for a brief time period. Then she moved it up to John Marks's place, and sold me things that I didn't need, but I felt I was raised, if you go in a store, you gotta buy something. You know, you just don't go in the store without buying something. So I'd always buy something, and sure enough, Florence was quite a gal. She, her daughter Patty had horses, had a horse, and it got a respiratory ailment once, so Florence put Vicks Vapor Rub on the horse's nose, and the horse reared up and almost, I guess, stomped her to death, but she got out of it. But that was, Florence was quite the gal. I forgot, over on the back street, Dave Birch had a butcher business. He had, you could get, buy a half a cow or whatever, have it butchered there, and he'd keep it in the freezer till you come and got it. And so he did a business there for quite some time. Then we go down the street to the Village Bar and Grill, which when I was young, friends of mine that I went to school with, their father owned it, Lloyd Kirk. It was called Kirky's. Originally, when it first opened, I think it was called the White Elephant. And then after that, it was called the Rendezvous. And then after that, I think it was called, Kirky's was the Rendezvous. Then the Village Bar and Grill, then Dip's Place. And Dip's son, Punk, opened it Punk's Place, and now it's the Double Down, which is a mystery to the entire town, what's happening with the Double Down, but we'll find out. And so that building has, used to be 2 stories. My father's mother, died in the upstairs of that. They had an apartment up there, and she got the measles, shortly after giving birth, and she died upstairs in the Village Bar and Grill. So then you come across the bridge, up the street, up McCarty Street, I never knew it, was the Candor Glove Factory. And I have a pair of gloves that was made at the Candor Glove Factory. That was a long white building that was, 2/3 the way up the block from Punk's on McCarty Street. And during the war, that was going business. That was a real going concern because they made gloves for the soldiers. And so they, who owned that? Jackson.
Sam Moore.
Sam Moore owned it, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
My father used to go, after he did the mail route, he would go over, and he was there was a side door, and he was right there, and he turned the gloves, that was what he was doing. And I could go and stand outside and talk to him, and, yeah.
So, and that employed a lot of people in Candor.
Yeah, there was, you have to be, yeah.
They employed a lot of people. Then up on the next corner was Glenn and Lillian Francis gas station. And some of you might remember Glenn and Lillian. Lillian had red hair. She always wore a hairnet, wore men's jeans, and sturdy tie-up Oxford shoes, the black, thick-heeled old lady high heels. And she would come out and pump gas, and she was the grease monkey and everything else for the gas station. And they had a going business there. And nothing like the Dandy is now, but it's where the Dandy was. And kitty corner to that was Leo Yers's and Don Yers's Vernon scope, which they made telescopes for all over the world. And I think they had an appliance department in there too. They sold appliances, washers and dryers and things like that. I don't know about dryers because I don't know if they were. I don't know if we had them then. But anyway, then you go up the Ithaca Road, and there was another appliance store, but mostly sold TVs, and that was Schooley. So it was Schooley's garage, and he sold used cars and had a very lucrative repair station there. And so he had like 3 businesses going at the same time. I remember we bought 2 of our cars there. They were both 1953 Chevys, and we paid $75 a piece for those cars. And so I'm not sure they were worth $75. But anyway, we got those cars there. So, and then back then, if your TV, something was wrong with your TV, you would take the back off, look for any tube that was black, and pull it out, and you could take it up there and test the tube, get a new tube, go back, put it in, and you had your TV again. And usually those TVs, some of you may remember after a while, the old black and white TVs would get rolling. The picture would get rolling, and us kids would take turns pounding on the top of the TV, and it would stop rolling for 3 minutes. And but it needed a tube then, and if your picture tube went, you were done for. You couldn't do anything, you had to get a new TV. But TVs lasted like 25 years back then, and they lasted forever. And radios as well.
Well, you didn't watch them all the time either.
No.
I mean, they weren't on. There was nothing on all the time.
No, Tuesday night at 7 was
Yeah.
Grayson City of Fashions with Bruce Grayson. And, Sunday nights was Ted Mack's Amateur Hour. And just after that was Lassie. And Lassie was on at 7. And those were good times. And, we were poor people, and we had to take our baths in a wash tub in front of the oven door. And my older sister would get the clean water, then my twin sister and I'd take turns over who would be next. And we had to do that with our birthday cakes, blowing them out too. And then my poor brother, he was the last one to get a bath in front of the oven door. And we'd always hurry so we could get done before Lassie. And I think that Rin Tin Tin was on too. And Saturday morning Rin Tin Tin was on, and out of the blue of the western sky comes Sky King. And the name of his plane was the Songbird. So some of you remember, didn't we have good times back
Wish they'd
then?
come back.
We really did, if we could go back. So then we come back down, and Ralph Twilliger Twig, he owned the next gas station down where, across from the Masonic Hall, where Smitty's garage was. And Benny Stokes owned it, I think in between Twig and Smitty. And that was a gas station there. Isn't that where Mike had his accident?
Across the road,
Across the road,
and that's, cinder block building, there was a diner, right?
where, no, the diner was the next wet place up. The across the road was Darlings lived there. And they had a garage there, and that's where Mike had his eye damaged through, a tire blew up, right?
Yep.
So that happened there, and the diner this side up was the Dohali, or out-of-towners called it the Duhal Inn, but it was the Dohali because it was named for Dorotha, Hattie, and Liam Dennis, a mother, father, and daughter that ran the Dohali. And Dorotha, she ran the diner a lot longer than she should have. So people would go in and get coffee, but didn't dare buy anything else, I don't think. And the thing about Dorotha is, if some of you remember, she had one tooth. Only one tooth. And so that was Dorotha. And they had a cabin out to the back that people could rent who were on their way to Ithaca or whatever. They could rent that cabin out behind the Dohali.
Oh, cool.
And so that's when roadside cabins were a big thing, you know, and especially like in the Adirondacks, but here it was a big thing to have a cabin rental there. Then we come down to the Highway Dairy Bar, run by Myron Pazushko and his sister Irene. Irene and Myron were brother and sister, and they fought like cats and dogs. They fought all the time, and neither one of them really wanted to wait on us kids, but they did, because they needed the money, I guess. But they opened that dairy bar, I think I was about 5 years old when they opened that. So it was probably in 1955 that they opened that. And Irene Benson is his sister's name, and the dairy bar is still going strong, and everywhere I go, oh, Candor, that's where that good ice cream is, isn't it? And everyone loves the ice cream at the Highway Dairy Bar. Then we go on around down to the gas station where the Moravido is, and the Moravido was when I was a kid, Don Aqua owned I think it was a Esso station. It was an Esso station, and he would always fix my flat tires on my bicycle, and he would hot patch it. and you put this stuff on it. Then he'd take out his lighter and light it, and I thought, he's gonna burn up my inner tube, you know, and then, oh no, we gotta get that going, and he'd let that burn for a while, then blow it out, and then he'd put a patch on it, and I was good for another 10 miles. And I had probably 10 or 12 patches on my tires, and he used to say, "You again?" It would be me, because I drove a lot of miles on a bicycle around Candor. Before Don Ack owned it, I think Andy Generette owned it. Andy and his wife Rita owned that. I don't remember them, but Kay does, and some of you, I'm sure, remember them. Then we go down to where Johnny's Market was, and that was the second strip mall in Candor. There was Johnny's Market in the middle, Pete's Barber Shop on one end, and the Millstream Inn on the other. And Pete's Barber Shop was run by an old Italian man by the name of Pete Silvestro. Pete Silvestro had a son, Everett, who went into barbering also. Pete's wife, Mary Silvestro, was about 4'11", and she drove an old Buick. When she drove, she didn't drive much, but she drove an old Buick, and you'd see it coming down the road, and you didn't know how it was coming down the road, so no one was driving it. And Mary was looking through the wheel, and my mother was 4'11", it was the same thing. These great big old cars, and no one was driving them. But then you'd look, and you could see them looking through the steering wheel right ahead. And so my brother and I got our hair cut at Pete's Barber Shop, and they would have to put, for little kids, they'd have to put a board across the barber chair, and my brother and I would sit there and bicker with each other who was going to have old Pete cut their hair and who was going to have young Pete or Everett cut their hair. Old Pete would put you in the chair up on that board, and then he'd fire up that clippers, the electric clippers, and then he would come at you. And with scissors the same way. You always wonder, am I going to live through this? I would always say, I'm older, Rick. You've got to go up with old Pete. I'm going to Everett. But we would fight, so we took turns going to old Pete and Everett. And that later on became the telephone office for Continental Telephone, I think, was in there. And Ruth Morris was still working for the telephone company then. And I had my office in where Johnny's store was, in the middle of that brick building. By the way, if you haven't seen it, they're doing a wonderful job with that building. It's been a long, they just got it painted this week. Each end is yellow. In the front, they painted the bricks. Really looks nice. They've been doing it, 5 years? And I don't know if anyone's ever going to live there, or if I'm going to live to see it. But anyway, that's that. And Johnny's old store was a wonderful place to go. A small store. You'd walk in, on the right was the penny candy case. On the left, up on the top shelf, was boots. You could buy your winter boots there. And you could buy your anything you needed at Johnny's, pretty much. And Johnny Robinson, Ron's father, owned it. And straight back was the meat case, where he would cut it was a deli case, and he would cut the bologna and the ham and stuff. And I had one of my first jobs there. At 14, got my work permit, and Johnny hired me to work there. And a woman that lived up the street, her name was Daisy, and she would come down. She knew Johnny would take a nap at 1 o'clock. So about 2 after 1, this woman named Daisy would come in, and she'd say to me, open one of those those 8 pieces of cheese, and that American cheese is all in its own wrapper. Open that up because I only need 4 slices. And I said, well, I can't open it. Johnny would let you sell that to me that way. I'd say, well, we'll go see. And I'd yell up to Johnny. Johnny'd say, make her buy the whole package. And the clincher for me was the day she came in and she didn't need a whole 8-ounce can of frozen orange juice. And she wanted me to give her half of an 8-ounce can of orange juice. And I thought, I could take the meat cleaver and whack that and make a 4-ounce can, or I could use it for other things. And one thing about Johnny's store that you may or may not know is it was the answering service for the fire company. And they would call, it was a steady ring when it rang, and you'd get the information, and then you would go out, and there was a button in the back of the store that you would blow the fire whistle. And so that was the receptionist for the Candor Fire Company. Both Alpha Hose and Alert Hose. That was that. I was thinking about that this morning, how some of you may remember that when we were younger, we had to go through air raid drills, where you had to go out in the hall in school and put your hands over your head and get on your knees in the hall. And of course, everyone said, we won't live anyway because IBM, they're going to drop an atomic bomb on that. And of course, the adults would tell us kids that. And of course, no wonder we aren't right.
True though.
Next door to Johnny's Market in that strip mall was the Millstream Inn that was run by Fred and Angeline Ambati. They opened it in 1939. I have a menu where I think a pork chop dinner with sides was 35 cents for 2 pork chops and sides. And they were known for their spaghetti, and everybody went there for spaghetti, and later on it was their tavern, their watering hole, so to speak. And after they owned it, the Crons, Leo and Evelyn Cron ran it for a while. Brian McGavin ran it for a while. Collier's ran it for a while as Fitzgerald's Pub. I ran it for a while before Collier's as the Millstream Inn. I kept it the Millstream Inn. And it ended up collapsing, and it was gone. I don't know who it was that bought that, but they were going to put a deck on the side of it, so they cut a hole in the brick wall, and it collapsed. And so that was gone. The walk-in cooler downstairs, where all the beer was kept, it was insulated with sawdust. And every once in a while you could see sawdust coming out of the cracks in there. It was insulated with sawdust. Kitty corner from the Millstream was the creamery, and Borden's Creamery. And the train would stop at the creamery and pick up milk. And the creamery would release steam, and it would have a whistle that blew early in the morning. So that we lived down on Humiston Street, you could always hear that, and you could hear the train stopping. And then the train would continue on up to the Heaths, had the coal business. That would be Dorothy DuPoy's parents, right? And they had the little house, was their office that was on the corner of Water Street, and the big red building that houses the food pantry now, and the children's clothing store, which they're doing a wonderful job with that. And that was where the coal was unloaded, and so they ran that business for a long time. Across the street from that was the Morris's Garage, and he and his wife, her name was Dorothy, I think, too, and they ran a garage there, and he always wore this hat that was like it didn't have a brim on it, or a bill on it, and he always wore that. I remember that, and she worked right along with him, and they owned a house that was sort of like just a retreat place up on Fairfield Road near Honey Pot, and that was taken down and became the Candor Physicians place there. Going back across the bridge was the feed mill for Warden and Scoys, and they would store feed in there and come and get it. And that feed mill had one of the only water wheels that went this way around rather than this way around. And I was told that as a kid, and it just intrigued me. Because when you're a kid in Candor at that age, you could go in where the wheel was gone, but the opening was still there. And us younger kids would watch the older kids go in with their girly magazines and go up into the mill and hide them. And so us younger kids would go and watch where they hid them, then we would go and move them someplace else. And we never looked at any of them. We were too young. So we, kids were in that mill a lot, an awful lot. Where the ambulance garage is now was Cabatile's farm equipment store. What small town in rural New York needs a farm equipment store? We did. And it was three brothers, Paul, Jimmy, and Tom Cavatile. And they all worked together, and they would repair farm equipment and sell new equipment. And that was a big thing on that corner where you go into the school there, between there and the doctor's office. That was Cavatile's farm equipment store. And then the next place up was the post office, which is not where the present post office is. That post office was closer to the farm equipment store, but they built a new one there. And there was two sisters that ran the post office, Peg Bolton and Baker, Myrtle Baker. Myrtle Baker and Peg Bolton. They ran the post office, and they would watch like a hawk if us kids came in there. And we were told if you do anything wrong, it's a federal offense, and you will go to federal prison, probably for the rest of your life. And I didn't even dare lick a stamp. I was afraid of what. But they ran a tight ship, and Marion Richards worked at the post office for quite some time, and Ted Nicholson worked at the post office for quite some time. Ted was a wonderful gal. She worked at Johnny's Market. The new store, which was where the village chapel is, was the new grocery store like no other. It had a conveyor belt checkout. Honest to God, it really did. And it would, it was the ultimate thing at the time. But Ted Nicholson worked there, and Ted and I were very close friends. And Ted actually was, at one time, was a golf caddy for John D. Rockefeller in New York City. And so I said, "Are you sure?" She says, "Well, of course I'm sure. Why would I lie to you?" And she was. I worked with her, and I worked with Charlotte Pratt, who owned, she ran a ceramics place down on Kelsey Road in the suburb of Hubbardtown. And so those are some of the buildings. I counted, we had 44 buildings that were businesses at one time. I didn't dare count how many we have now. but I don't think it's 44. Those of us who grew up in Candor, I think it gave us such a rich start in life because we had no fears whatsoever. We all learned to swim at the dam or in the creek. All learned to swim at the dam. The wooden dam, which there was only 2 in New York State, and we took the one out, and the other one was over on Glens Falls. I don't know if that's still there or not. But I really regret that the dam was taken out because that really should have stayed. A lot of good memories there. The kids would swim till dark. And parents would allow you to. And just be home when the street lights come on, you get home. You know, and that was such a rich upbringing for us, you know. And Larry Hines taught swimming classes each summer when school was out, and no matter how cold it was, we still had swimming class, and you'd swim out a ways in the deep part, and the water snake would go across in front of you, and you'd swim real fast back. And when you got older and bigger, not wiser, but bigger, you could go under the dam and see what was under the dam, and you were a big person if you went under the dam and came out alive. And there was an old tree there that they had put steps up and a rope on the tree, and they put steps up, and they could swing out on that rope and drop into the deep part. I learned to swim because they threw me off the dam, and I couldn't get up the ladder to get back on the dam because Marion Turner was going up the ladder, and she was bigger at the time, and I couldn't get by her, and so I learned to doggy paddle really fast. I learned to swim at the dam, and we all learned to swim at the dam, most of us.
I was hired to help the person who was instructor. I think I might have been a senior in high school, and I couldn't keep the job because the boys came and she was the instructor wasn't only a couple of years older than me, and they were such pests. They had to hire somebody that could take care of the boys and their pests. Yeah.
I think I had a woman instructor that was probably the same person. Her name, she lived up in the apartment where the Fire Station was. I think her name was Aya Ball, B-A-L.
No, that wasn't her.
No. But she was an
I know who you mean,
instructor.
but it wasn't her. No. Yeah. I mean, this gal, like I say, she's only a couple years older than me, and she just couldn't control so they had to hire somebody.
We all have wonderful memories of living in Candor, and no kids had to worry about being abducted or shot, you know, and I think often of the things. I've got a picture of me in my junior play wearing Jake Haig's uniform. I was a policeman, and Jake and I were about the same size. I graduated, I weighed 122, and I was 5'4", and Jake let me have his uniform for the play. And he said, I can't let you have the gun till the night of the play. You know, and can you imagine that nowadays? Giving a kid a gun to go to school? Especially a whack job like me. But anyway, it's been a wonderful experience living in Candor. I truly appreciated it. Whenever I travel in my work, people will say, isn't that where that pumpkin farm is? And then a lot of people will say, isn't there a psychic or somebody that lives there? I say, yeah, I think so. And,
Isn't there a goat farm? The goat farm.
The
A lot of people know about
we
the
have
goat
the
farm.
goat farm, which is up by the Legion now. That's going to. So it's been a wonderful experience, and I enjoy reminiscing. Is there any comments or anything anyone would like to say?
Well, I'm a little bit younger than you, and I remember growing up in the 70s. There were still the same kind of businesses. Like next to the George's was the pharmacy with all the candy, run by the Italian guy from New York City or New Jersey, Kappa.
Capiello.
Yeah.
Capiello.
Yeah, Pete. And I remember that. And then later on, or about the same time, maybe there was the candy store across the street, the fountain. And
Marge Pressure ended
Yeah.
up running that for a while
Yeah.
after Kilpatrick.
yep, and then later on there was a drugstore on the corner by Dick's for a short period of time. But I remember being able, like go to all those places, like you said, and it just so much different than now. Now you gotta drive for everything.
Elmer Kilpatrick, who ran Killy's store, was also the organist at the Congregational Church for a while.
He played the organ?
Yeah,
Yes.
he was the organist there for a while.
I'll be there.
And I think that Ruth Miller also played the organ there for a while.
Ruth Miller played when the town hall, well, George's was the town hall, and they had silent films there. She played the organ for the music for the silent films.
She played some of those songs for her grandson Tommy and I one time when we were at her house. The songs she would have played for the silent movies, the melodrama stuff, and the rapid moving train headed for the girls' side to the tracks. And that was good. The Red and White store was a movie theater for a brief time period called the Nickelodeon, Bijou Nickelodeon, ran by a guy that was dressed as a Civil War soldier always. He went by the name Colonel Custer. And so that was a theater for a brief time. So, anything anyone wants to add? Yes.
Didn't Myron Miller used to have antique cars?
He had, when he died, he had 37 antique cars.
And the one I remember seeing had the rumble seat in the front. And everybody told somebody that they didn't believe it. And I asked my one cousin about it. He said, yes, there was such a vehicle. I don't remember what it was.
He had a chauffeur-driven Stutz Bearcat car that was just absolutely beautiful. He had, I believe, a 1914 Model T that there was only two like it in the United States. And I remember him telling us that one of them burned in a fire in California. He had the other one, and I think that Ruth donated that to the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan when he died. He died exactly 1 week from the night I graduated from high school in '68.
Wow.
So, and I always wanted to drive one of those, and I drove one of his, it was a 1926, I believe, that had a solid oak frame on it. It was not a metal frame.
Wow.
It was solid oak. I think it was a 1926 Franklin, and I got to drive it, not too far, but I got to drive it. And he's actually the reason that I got a high wheel bicycle, because he had one of those, and I always wanted to drive it, and he'd say, legs aren't long enough. I'd say, can I ride that high wheel bicycle? Legs aren't long enough. About 3 years into it, he says, I think your legs are long enough, you can do it. So he helped me get up on it, and I rode it for a little while. So then when I saw one I could have, I got one and rode it for 36 years in the parade.
Couldn't you put training wheels on it?
No,
I missed that.
when I first started, I would get up on the roof of a car and get over, because you sit 4.5 feet in the air. So I dropped down on the seat from the roof of a car. But how you start it, there's a little sort of pedal type thing, juts out from the back wheel. You put your foot on that and scoot along till you get enough momentum, then you pull yourself up on to the leather seat. And I rode it for 36 years. I would ride it again. That's on my bucket list.
Okay.
I'm trying to get my back good enough that I can ride it one more time.
You can modify it like all the other kids in Candor and put a motor on it.
Yeah, I could do that. I could do that. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's been great talking with all of you, and I love to reminisce. So certainly
We'll have you.
enjoy the country, enjoy the village we live in. And most importantly this year, please vote, because I think it's a crucial time period that we need to vote. and show our country that we're patriotic, that we're loyal. So please vote, so.
The gas station that Don Ackler had, that building across the road from that, didn't Cub Dents used to own that?
Cub Dens
'Cause I
had
lived
it,
there at one point.
Cub Dens had an antique store there at one
Yeah.
point, yeah. The yellow building across that Lance Seaman had for a while,
Yeah, we lived there for a while.
yeah. Thank you all very
Thank you.
much. Thank you.